Edward Said's Orientalism is one of the most influential books of the 20th century, a work that challenges how we think about knowledge, power, and representation. It takes us deep into the history of how the West has imagined and dominated the East, and the consequences of those imaginings. Today we'll unpack its core arguments, its significance, and why it remains so relevant. So what exactly is Orientalism? Said defines it in three key ways. First, as an academic discipline. For centuries, scholars, writers, and researchers studying the Middle East, North Africa, and Asia were known as Orientalists. Their work, what Said calls Orientalism, shaped much of how the West perceived the East. Second, Orientalism is a style of thought. It's based on the belief that there's a fundamental divide between East and West, where the West is seen as rational, advanced, and civilized, while the East is viewed as exotic, backward, and irrational. Third, and most critically, Orientalism is a system of power. It's not just about ideas, it's about how those ideas are used to dominate and control. For Said, Orientalism is deeply tied to colonialism. It provided the intellectual justification for Western powers to conquer and rule the East under the guise of civilizing it. Said traces the roots of Orientalism back to medieval Europe. At that time, Islam was seen as a direct threat to Christianity. To neutralize this threat, European writings reduced Islamic culture to a set of stereotypes. It was easier to depict the East as barbaric and inferior than to engage with its complexity. Fast forward to the 18th and 19th centuries, when European colonial empires were at their peak. Orientalist scholars, often supported by imperial governments, created vast bodies of work that portrayed the East as a mysterious, unchanging region in need of Western intervention. This knowledge, Said argues, wasn't objective. It was deeply shaped by the West's political and economic interests. Here's the crux of Said's argument. Representation is never neutral. The way the West has represented the East, through literature, art, and academic work, has always served to reinforce its power. Think of novels, travelogues, and paintings depicting the East as a land of harems, snake charmers, and despots. These aren't just innocent depictions. They shape how people think and justify actions. For example, when Napoleon invaded Egypt in 1798, his understanding of the country was shaped by Orientalist texts. These texts reduced Egypt to myths and stereotypes that made it easier to dominate. While Orientalism originated in Europe, Said argues that the United States inherited and adapted it in the 20th century. American Orientalism, particularly during the Cold War, shifted its focus to geopolitical dominance. In the media and academia, the Middle East was often portrayed as a hotbed of violence, extremism, and chaos. These representations fueled policies that prioritize control over understanding. Of course, Orientalism hasn't been without criticism. Some scholars accuse Said of essentializing the West and the East in his critique, falling into the very trap he condemns. Others argue that he focuses too much on British, French, and American examples, leaving out contributions from other traditions. But regardless of these critiques, the book's impact is undeniable. It has reshaped fields like post-colonial studies, cultural theory, and Middle Eastern studies. And its message, that knowledge and power are deeply intertwined, remains as relevant today as ever.